is Behind the Games from newoverlords.com, where we seek creators of all kinds to find out what's behind our favorite games. With your hosts, Jeff and Sema.
This is Behind the Games, and from our Midwest studio, I'm Jeff Ilimek.
And from our Northeast studio, I'm Sema.
So I spent the past week in Seattle at PAX West, meeting with tons of creators and studios and other game industry leaders of different kinds. Today, we're going to do a little bit of a special edition show, no guest, and we're going to just talk about a sampling of the things that caught my eye. There were big studios there were big events there, but the things that I'm going to talk about today, and Sema's going to ask me questions about, are really focused on some of the smaller things that you may have missed. So to kick it off, I figured, Sema, we should just talk about the show in general, because this is what everyone asks me about.
So I'm looking forward to this because I've heard a few of the stories already, and I know there's more to come. So let's start.
One of the things I did, both of the first 2 days that I was there, I will say, on the first day especially, I took a whole bunch of video of the show floor. I was excited. I wanted to do a video about the show floor, and I took a whole bunch of video. It was terrible because I was just like waving my camera all around, looking at all the things. I didn't really have a plan, so it didn't come together all of that well. So I redid all of that the second day. I also tried to walk around and get a lay of the booths and meet some people the first day, some of the top exhibits that I wanted to see. The second day, I did that again, with this time much more methodically. I used my tripod, tried to get some video, still not as well produced as I would like, but I cut it together while I was there in the hotel room and put together an 8-minute overview of the entire expo floor. The only places I left out of the expo floor were some of the competitive arena, even though I showed that a little bit. There was a little bit of a board gaming session in the Sky Deck, which seems smaller than PAX East, which I left out a little bit. But the video, if you are watching the video version of this, the video really showed the entire whole show floor really fast. I was just sort of scanning back and forth. I would put the tripod down and I would do a sweep, and then I would move down to the end of the aisle and do a sweep, zoom in on a couple things, show a couple things, as pretty much as quick as I could. Relatively
so you said
fast cuts.
The board game area of PAX West was a little smaller than PAX East, but PAX West itself was much bigger than PAX East.
Yes. And this video is as short as I could make it, was 8 minutes, because the expo is huge and the rest of PAX West seemed to me to be enormous. So
yeah,
you would probably get a sense of that from this video. And that's where I would sort of wanted to start. Is it was, to me, it seemed huge. Now, I've had a couple people say it was much bigger in the past. PAX West pre-pandemic potentially was very large. This seemed enormous to me. There were big names. There were big sponsors. There were tons and tons and tons of medium-sized and small-sized indie studios. I couldn't imagine them packing anything else onto the show floor.
And the booths, some of them are just very elaborate.
Yeah. So the big names that were there, this won't be the focus of what we're talking about, but the big names being Nintendo, Sega, Bandai Namco, Pokemon. There was this huge Pokemon playtest going on. All of those giant ones had big, giant booths, very elaborate. Bandai Namco was releasing the One Piece Odyssey game to go with the One Piece manga anime series that's really popular right now. That was huge. Big exhibit. Even some of the medium-sized studios that were there, like Larian Studios, who's doing Baldur's Gate, they were one of the bigger ones at PAX East. They had their exhibit there again with a bunch of stations where you could play the Baldur's Gate release so far, and then a really cool sort of castle booth of their own. So really big exhibits like that. And then the hardware vendors, Intel was at PAX East, but Intel and AMD and Asus and Aorus, big exhibits of all of theirs. I've got some video of the Intel booth that had custom rigs. It was even a little bit cooler than what they had at PAX East. They had these really custom cases for PCs. I have one there that's an Elden Ring custom case, all sculpted, and it's a PC case, but it looks like a statue exhibit for Elden Ring. So in my view, very, very big. some of the medium-sized studios that had very big spaces, Tiny Build, Larian, Tripwire, Thunderful, those were very cool places where they had a bunch of their games or that they're either making themselves or publishing, and then a bunch of the smaller studios. So this is probably where we'll spend most of our time, is talking about some of these smaller studios, but even the medium-sized smaller studios like Finji, who we did one of our interviews with, Jonah from Finji. I was able to stop by Finji and talk to them and say hi. So yeah,
awesome.
In my view, quite large, quite big. So big, in fact, that I did have to book an extra. I extended my trip. I booked an extra day and stayed around longer because, well, two reasons. One, it was so big, there was more people I felt I needed to talk to and some exhibits that I was missing, and I still missed. I didn't stop by every single booth and every single game. I went to the ones that caught my eye or the ones that I researched ahead of time. But the other thing was I messed around a bunch with a bunch of this video and producing the video, not during exhibit hours, but enough that I probably could have squeezed it into the 2.5 days or the 2 days that I had booked and not had to do an extra day. But that's fine. It worked really well. I also enjoy being in Seattle. I've visited there my entire career and enjoy visiting the town. I also think if I was ever going to live or work anywhere else in the country, that would be pretty high on my places to live and work. There's fun cities to visit, New York, San Francisco. I would never want to live in those two places, though.
I really enjoyed the time I spent living in Seattle area.
Yeah. I got a bunch of runs in and all of that kind of thing. Okay. So my view, bigger than PAX East, definitely. Enormous in my view. Plenty of things to do and see. And the video that I showed was just the show floor. There was still all of the other floors and all of the other things that are PAX, which is, there was the classic games arcade. There was all of the sessions and the Omegathon competition and the gaming, the board gaming room where you could check out board games and play them with your friends, and bring your own PC area where you could have your PC set up, and the libraries where you could check out games and just play them on the PCs that they had set up for you. Tons and tons and tons of those things. So it was very, very cool. But what I was there for, Sema, is to meet with some of these medium and smaller size studios, especially, although I met with a couple of big people from big studios as well. But medium and smaller size studios, there was a few that I had picked out beforehand, and I had like a top 5, 6, 7 list. I made sure I hit those. And then to try to meet with as many others as I could, to try to meet with the creators that were there. So I wasn't as interested in meeting with the PR person, or in a couple of the very big booths, they hire a production company and it's a bunch of, interns who are standing around and can answer a couple questions. Not them so much as the creators, because that's what we do. So I figured I'd start with a bigger one. And this bigger one I had not come across beforehand, but it had a relatively big booth. The publisher is being published by Tripwire. The studio is called Sweet Bandits. Sweet Bandits is based in Quebec. They seemed really cool. I did look them up after I got there and saw this exhibit. The exhibit was this relatively big booth where a bunch of people could all play together. This game that they have called Deceive Incorporated, Deceive Inc. And what Deceive Inc. is, and I think this is going to be a big game. That's why I wanted to talk about it a little bit. What Deceive Inc. is, it's sort of a cross between Hitman, if you remember IO Interactive and Hitman. You ever play that where you're a secret agent? And
it's kind of puzzle oriented, or at least exercises your brain a little.
Right. You got a little mission you got to go do. Crossed with Among Us, which is you're playing with a whole bunch of other people, and you are sort of playing against them potentially as well. Right. And the way it works, though, with this game, with Deceive Inc., is you don't know who the other players are. You're doing your mission. You're sort of like doing your secret agent mission in this building or office building or wherever you are. And there's other NPCs. And those NPCs might be other players, but you don't know. And you don't want to do things that blow your cover. but you also want to prevent the other players from completing their missions, and you want to complete your mission. And the way they've even tuned it up is if you like look around a whole bunch, if you're like looking behind you, it doesn't make your character like nod their head back and forth.
Yeah, they don't turn.
That doesn't blow your cover. If you shoot somebody else, that would obviously blow your cover. So or if you do something really suspect, like you're killing someone, or I don't know what all of the missions might be. It seemed really popular, really fun, big party game kind of thing. They will be able to be multiplayer on the internet. You will be able to have groups of people going together. There's also really good art.
Right. I was just I'm looking at the YouTube video that they put out too, and it's extremely interesting look.
Right. Stylized,
almost Art Deco-y.
Right. In a really good way, in a way that will be time invariant. They're not trying to really be photorealistic.
Right.
Which can get you into trouble.
Almost
to the level of Fortnite, but
Uncanny Valley, yeah.
But you're not as zoomed out as Fortnite kind of artwork. But really cool. So I think that's going to be a big deal. I thought that was a fun one to call out. I did talk to two of the people from the studio that were really fun and interesting to talk to and meet with. They didn't have direct contact information. Tripwire and the head of PR for Tripwire was there, and I did talk to him. It seems like we would need to go through Tripwire if we want to talk to Sweet Bandits. So we'll see. I don't know if that...
Do you have to, could you play it with all NPCs, or does it have to be against other players or with other players?
It seemed multiplayer to me, so I don't know for sure. That'd be a good one to dig into.
Right.
And with each of these, I was thinking if there are things that are really interesting to us, maybe we'll do a little bit of 5-minute video of
the game.
Yeah. The game.
This is more about PAX West, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, one to dig into, one to watch. Okay. That's number one. Number two, this was the only booth and exhibit where I booked time. So I had my media badge and I got ahead of time a list of booths and studios where their PR teams sent me a note and said, hey, you can book time if you want. This was the only one where I booked time because I knew it would be quite busy, and one that I had been aware of beforehand. Cygnus Entertainment. So Cygnus Entertainment is Roberta and Ken Williams. Roberta and Ken Williams were the original creators back in the 70s and 80s of Sierra Online. If you're not familiar with Sierra Online, then you're not as ancient as some of us in gaming.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, that was in the 70s and 80s, and it was mostly in the 80s that Sierra Online, in fact, I don't think the Sierra Online name came online until the 80s, but King's Quest. King's Quest was an old school game. That was Sierra Online. There was a whole other series of games for Sierra Online. Then Sierra Online got bought in the 80s and 80s into the 90s. And Roberta and Ken, Roberta was a designer, Ken was a developer. They built up Sierra Online. They sold it off. They worked underneath their parent company for a while, and then they left the industry kind of in around 1997, 1998. The impetus for creating Sierra Online, the thing that got them into gaming originally, because I think Ken was in technology working for IBM or something like that, was an old text adventure that had originally been built on mainframes in the 70s. And it was called Adventure.
Mm-hmm.
Colossal Cave Adventure or Advent. There was sort of different names for it because it was just a few hundred lines of code originally on a mainframe of a text adventure that the originator did as sort of a little experiment and kind of abandoned it. It wasn't like they didn't sell it. And then somebody else picked it up and did a version of it. And then it kind of became open domain, and a few studios did create games around it and then created like 2D games around it and eventually some 3D games. Colossal Cave Adventure was this text game. So Sierra Online didn't do Colossal Cave back then, but Ken and Roberta got involved, saw this thing and said, this is amazing. This is going to be big. Let's do this. Anyways.
I see that they say that it runs on Meta. So I take that to mean it's going to be VR friendly.
Yeah, the new game. So,
yeah, the new game, right.
Yeah. So 97, 98, they left the industry. They sold off their assets. They left the industry, and they've been sailing the world. My view, and
living the dream.
And you can look up colossalcave3d.com. There is a Ken and Roberta Williams sort of like little video that tells their story a little bit. They've been living the dream, sailing the world. COVID hit. They kind of had to dock their boat. They couldn't visit anywhere. They couldn't travel. And Ken said, what should I do? What's this Unity thing? Let me dig back into this. From there, they decided, let's do it. Let's get back into video game development. Colossal Cave 3D. Let's take that original idea of that adventure game, Colossal Cave Adventure, and make a 3D version of it. And it was just going to be a 3D version of the game on PC. And they got a couple other people involved. In fact, I talked to their lead creative director, and their lead creative director also told them where everything is headed is VR as well. So it's also going to be in VR. So that's probably what you're seeing there too.
I see they're like maybe folding some of their travel affection in there too, because they're going to be in Tokyo next week.
Yes. Yeah. There's a big game conference in Tokyo next week. There's a couple of these studios that I talked to that were going there. So Gamescom in Europe was a few weeks ago. There's this now, and the game show in Tokyo. That's just crazy for some of them that are going to all of those. But yeah, I met them. This was interesting. I wanted to get sort of like that history. I wanted to meet them. I've got a little video of them hanging out, taking pictures with fans. They were sort of swamped there. It was just like a little small little 12 by 12 booth. They didn't have a big thing, but they've been getting interviewed by like Wired magazine and a bunch of big outlets. I may try to get them. I don't know. What do you think, Sema? They seem very busy, and they seem
yeah.
They seem kind of overwhelmed too, because they were kind of retired, and now they're getting like dumped back into this, and I could see in their eyes, Roberta.
It's like
they're like
they made the choice, but it's sort of like that first step is a doozy,
right?
They made the choice, and there's kind of
right.
Being pulled in now. They're like, you're back? Oh, cool. Do this and this and this and this.
Yeah. So we'll see. But that was an interesting one. And I think it's going to be interesting to watch only because it's going to get a lot of press because of its history. Let's talk about a couple others. Another one that was top on my list because of what I had seen beforehand. And I got a lot of time talking to A.K. Linsfield, their creative producer, and Jason Parks, the CEO, company called ROTU. And the game is called Eolia. Eolia. You can look up rotu.com/Eolia or just look up rotu.com. This is VR, and the reason I was really interested in it is it pushes the boundaries a little bit. And this is also what I was looking for when I was out there. So Eolia is hand tracking. It runs on the Quest, and it uses a little bit of a next-gen feature of the Quest that you can turn on your Quest, which is hand tracking. So you don't use the hand controllers. This, I think, will potentially be the future. It's definitely already the future for augmented reality headsets. You need to be able to use your hands when you're doing real things in the real world. You can't just be walking down the street with controllers in your hands. They've done some really interesting things to make a beautiful game, for one. For two, it's a puzzle and storytelling game with a very environmental theme, for two. That makes it stand out. The puzzles are hard, for three. It focuses on environmentalism and a little bit of climate change themes in the game, and they're donating a percentage of the proceeds of the game towards Gaming for Good initiatives related to climate change. 4, that seems really interesting. And then the tech side. Hand tracking is really interesting to me. And then this whole studio, so ROTU is relatively small. They've got about a dozen people, maybe a couple more. But the core of the studio who started it, a lot of them are composers and musicians. And they've taken audio and they've made it integral to that hand tracking experience. Because when you don't have the controllers in your hand, you don't get the vibration haptic feedback off the controllers when you interact with the world. So you've got a headset on, and when you pick up an object with the controller can buzz a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got that haptic feedback that makes you feel like you've grabbed the object. What they've done is they're using auditory cues, and they've created a library of those auditory cues to trigger your brain into getting that little bit of feedback when you use your hand tracking to pick up and interact with the world.
Right. What I find really interesting about this too, I'm looking at their site, is they also say two things in one comment, but one is like great for gamers and VR newcomers alike. So I might be reading into this, but I feel like they're embracing the concept that we've talked about before, which is that the world is becoming gamers. Everyone's becoming a gamer. It's almost like a gamer is not a thing so much anymore as it's games are out there and people play them.
Right.
And then they also use the term family friendly, which means a specific thing to me. And I also think that's interesting and speaks to like a breaking out of the sort of core of gamers.
Yes. There were a ton of games. We'll talk about a couple of them here that get towards that class of really family friendly or casual or cozy games.
Mm-hmm.
There were a ton of sort of areas, exhibits, studios, publishers that I would say fall into that classification. A ton on the other side as well. The big, fighting games.
There's room for all.
Spaceships and big mechs shooting each other, but a ton on this other side. So yeah, that's a cool one. The next one is another one that I definitely had on my list. Moonatic Studios and their game One Last Breath. So this is a very small team, about a half a dozen people in Spain. Youngsters. It seemed like a relatively young team of energetic people out of Spain. They created this game called One Last Breath. And it's kind of a side scroller adventure discovery, very low key theme, not a lot of like shooting or fighting. You're using some nature abilities for your character, which is Gaia. And Gaia needs to travel through this post-apocalyptic landscape and use some of these nature abilities to both escape from dangers and overcome obstacles and solve some puzzles and get through the game. Again, a little bit of an environmental theme. Beautiful, beautiful art.
It's very striking. Yeah, again, very striking.
The animation, the artwork, the layers that are going into, even though it's 2D, the layering looks really, really amazing. So this team, small team, Gamescom, they won the Indie Arena Booth's Best Game Award at Gamescom. So they got on my radar for that. I did stop by. They were super cool to talk to. I will probably get them on the show as soon as they're done in Tokyo. They're going just right to Tokyo from the show too. Their hair is on fire. They're flying around everywhere. Gamescom, PAX West. They had not been out of Spain before this. A couple of them, and it's
Oh,
been
that's
crazy
so
for them.
exciting! Yeah,
They've been picked up by
Wow.
a publisher to help them get the game out as well. That's how some of this is happening. I did talk to one of the executives that's part of the publishing team that's got them out there.
again, it's like a timeless style. It's its own style.
Right. And it's really beautiful artwork. So if
It
you're
is.
into that sort of like thematic post-apocalyptic side scroller puzzle adventure, check it out. Just look at the videos on it and you'll see what I mean by that, just that artwork style. Another one in VR that got my interest, which is also beautiful and beautiful style, but pushes the boundaries a little bit, is a studio called Played with Fire. And they, at PAX, and in the lead up to PAX, I think at PAX, they announced a new VR game called Mixture. So it's not out yet, or will hopefully will be coming out relatively soon. And I think the idea of Mixture is it's a couple things. it's power-ups and potions that's part of the idea of mixture, but you're also mixing what you're controlling in the game. So you're doing it in VR. You have a little bit of a orthographic view of a little avatar that's like running through the environment and fighting with the monsters and, fighting through obstacles. And it's a really cool looking avatar. And then you also, in addition to sort of nudging your avatar in the direction that the avatar needs to go, controlling what is going to happen next, you and your hands in sort of like an overview God mode are interacting with the world and your avatar as well. So with the controllers and with the VR and your hands, you're picking up power-ups that might be on the sides of the screen, really built into the landscape, and throwing them into the fight or throwing them at a monster or powering up your little avatar. So that combination of controlling the adventure of your avatar and beautifully rendered, high definition VR art, and you as the God mode controlling additional pieces of the environment and power-ups and assists, pushing the boundaries. I really like that idea. That really stood out to me.
As opposed to like the other games you're talking about where it was like other players involved. This is you, but you're playing two characters.
Yes. So you're in effect controlling both yourself as the overlord and the avatar you're controlling to some degree as well.
Yeah. Very interesting.
This studio is an indie studio in Poland. And we'll talk more about Poland and indie games in a second, but I wanted to call that out because that feeds into some bigger stuff that I will mostly talk about at the end. I won't go deep into that Poland indie games, but I will call them out because it's a big deal. It's bigger than I thought. Next game I wanted to call out, a game that I had seen beforehand and really liked the look and style of and wanted just to learn more about, and caught up with the developer for just a couple notes back and forth in the Discord for this game. Is a game called Elements. Wreckit Games is the developer, which is mostly a solo guy with help from a handful of other people that he's sort of pulled in. Devon is his name, and I talked to him. I met him there. I talked to him for a little while. He was in the Apogee booth, so Apogee is the publisher. Apogee does a great job. I think Apogee is doing some really interesting things, pulling in good games, good developers, good indies, and getting those games out. In fact, there was a couple others in the Apogee booth that I talked to. I won't go into detail here, but beneath the stone, below the stone, I talked to, I've got his card right here. Mike, I talked to Mike Strollart from Below the Stone, a little pixel game that we will get into in a future episode. But Apogee, great job. Elements as a game, it's a 3D adventure game, almost Breath of the Wild style a little bit. The elements are biomes focused around a particular element where you need to go on an adventure and bring it back. And it's all done in Unreal. And talking to Devon, and this is what I'd love to get him on the show to talk about more. When I first started asking him about it, he said, "Yeah, I picked Unreal because I'm not a big coder. I'm just a beginner coder. So the scripting systems inside of Unreal allowed me to make this game much more effectively." And my jaw kind of dropped open because my impression of development in Unreal,
mine too.
Unreal is C++ based. When you're building the game engine components, or you need to stress the engine. And he has someone helping with a little bit of that kind of thing too. But he's done most of the work as a non-coder in the node and scripting tools within Unreal to make this game. So findthestones.com, really cool looking, really seemed to me to be relatively advanced kind of 3D adventure game, and all built in Unreal in this mode of this developer who's got obviously the great creative direction and the great gameplay direction, being able to put this game out without a lot of coding skill, quote unquote. We need to dig into that more. So we'll need to catch up with Devon, I think, Sema
Yeah.
and find out what that actually means.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Let's see. So then I got to a couple other smaller, even smaller ones. The next one, I don't know how popular the game is going to be. I think it's pretty cool, and it'll definitely be a successful game, but a smaller game, a game called Sail Forth, and David Evans did almost all of it solo. It's a sailing game, and he was interested in sailing. He wanted to create.
It's adorable looking too.
Yeah, the setting kind of reminds me a little bit of Raft. So Raft is a survival adventure game that's not. It was just released this year, but it's been early access for a few years now, and it's been a team that's been developing it. But that's really got the survival vibe. Sailforth is much more focused on the sailing adventure and even some of the mechanics of sailing, but stylized graphics, a fun little game. QAG Publishing. I forgot what QAG stands for. Quantum Astrogation Group. Maybe you can look that up while we're talking.
Yeah, maybe I can. Quantum Astrophysicists Guild.
Quantum Astrophysicists Guild is a publisher. They do a couple games of their own. They're a publisher. There was 2 games there where I met the developers, and QAG was publishing them. This is the name caught my eye, and they seem pretty cool. So they're publishing it for David. They picked it up. They said, "Hey, would you want to get involved?" He said yes, and was then able to do PAX West as a result. His booth, which I've got some video of, was really cool because they actually sort of like built a boat in the little booth. It was a little bit big, maybe 14 by 14 booth, but they built a boat. He took apart a controller. I think it was a PlayStation controller, and wired it to a ship's wheel so that you could actually play the game with the ship's wheel there in the booth. And then he had a couple other stations set around. That really caught my eye. It was interesting. And then it was interesting to talk to him about that. And then the other thing that really got me with talking with David was his father's a sailor, and that's where he got his love of sailing. And his father sailboats. My father was a sailor, and my father passed away about 8 years ago. But I grew up on sailboats as well. He said he play tests it with his dad, and that's like a big part of the game development loop for him. And that was kind of a really cool story.
Yeah.
That got to me. Brought a tear to my eye when he was talking about that. So hopefully we'll get David on and he'll be able to talk about that more. He did get a couple other people involved to add story and adventure to the game. So some writers and some adventure. So it's not just sailing. There'll be more to it. And it's sort of like sailing for a reason, sailing for adventure. That sounds really cool. And cool booth, cool person. So well done, David, as well.
Nice.
Also by Quantum Astrophysicists Guild publisher, I met Amanda End is her name. And she was the game developer, the systems developer for a game called Freshly Frosted. So this is a much smaller, cute puzzle game that was really interesting to hear her talk about. So it was in one of these booths where they have this a lot at the PAX shows, and I think other shows as well. They block out a 20 by 20 area, and they have just a bunch of screens set up and an indie, a very small indie. So this was just a handful of like 3 or 4 or 5 people that put this game together. They have just their game on one of the things in a bigger booth. So an indie developer doesn't necessarily need to block out a whole booth of their own if they're involved with a publisher, or if they can get into the Humble Bundle exhibit, or they can get into the PAX Rising Indie Games exhibit. They might be able to get a much smaller space and still show off their game and get to the show that way. So Amanda showed me this game, and it's a cross between cute little puzzle, frosting donuts, kind of
cupcakes. Yeah.
Cupcake donut frosting game, and Factorio. So what Amanda said was she loves the manufacturing assembly line Factorio kind of games, and that's what she wanted to build. This was sort of like a side gig. She got together with a few other people and was doing this thing. And that was obviously way too complicated and way too big. The creative director just loved this cutesy style of the donuts and frosting the donuts. So the way you play the game is there are sort of like the frosting stations, and it gets more and more complicated, but they put on the frosting and the toppings in different orders, and there's an assembly line which starts spitting out donuts, and you have to basically draw the path of the assembly line to complete the order of the donuts and hit all of the appropriate stations in the appropriate order with your tracing your path of the assembly line, so that when they ship to the little box at the end, when the assembly line gets to there, you have the right style completed donut. Cute booth. Also, I've got a couple pictures of the booth. I don't know if I don't think I put it in the overview video, but I'll show you those videos separately, Sema. They got Corsair to help them take a Corsair PC case, mouse, and keyboard, and tune the light, you can get the LED lights built into your keyboard and your mouse, which I typically don't like, but it worked really well for this. They tuned the lighting to match whatever the color scheme and lighting was on the screen at the time. So it all kind of like lit up while you were playing it, and that was really cool too.
Yeah, the color scheme I'm looking at it is all sort of strong pastels, pink, blue, the colors of frosting.
Yes, exactly. So that was a great one. Amanda was really cool. I hope we'll get a chance to talk to Amanda sometime.
I would love to.
That was excellent. More. Let's talk about at least two more. So that'll give us 10. So number 9. I talked to Morgan, and she was the creative director, and this was a 2-person game that they were putting together from a studio called Smol Games. It's just those two, and they're partners on this game. Hyde's Haunt and Seek. You can find the wish list, at least, and some of the preview videos for Hyde's Haunt and Seek on Steam. Caught my eye for the aesthetic and the style of game, which I thought was really cool. Imagine kind of the gameplay of Luigi's Haunted Mansion, but really set in more of the style of Disney's Haunted Mansion, Victorian era style, aesthetic of a little bit of a puzzle exploration game for 2 people. Or I think it was like 3 people. I think it was 2 people in one place, and then the other person was in the other place. And what you've got going on is you've got a person that is adventuring through the haunted mansion, and they're doing this in one screen. And then you've got a couple other people who are the poltergeists, the ghosts, and setting like ghost traps and puzzles for the seeker to go explore and find. So it's kind of like that co-op, people playing together, kind of that party game style, haunted mansion aesthetic, very well done artwork. And then for the whole booth, of course, Morgan had designed a bunch of the Victorian style, like playbill and stuff for the art for the table and the booth, and that all came out really well as well.
It's very intricate, the artwork.
Yeah, really, really great art style.
And the lighting makes it very interesting, but it's like opulent fabrics and detailed carvings and scary Punchinello dolls.
But not too scary. So this is what Morgan was telling me, is she wanted to do this kind of game, but she was not going to do a horror game.
Okay.
The horror genre.
You're right. This does not
big.
look like horror. Yeah.
And so she was up for it. She was up for this idea of this sort of spooky game, but wanted it to be something accessible and didn't want to be some terrible horror game. So that idea of Disney's Haunted Mansion, that seemed like, to me, to be a great place to land. It's kind of like that family-friendly, scary, haunted theme and vibe. I was always a big fan of Disney's Haunted Mansion growing up.
Me too. In fact, my favorite thing about that is the music. So now I'm kind of interested to see what the music will be like on this.
Yes. and there are some good music. We're sort of glossing over the music in a lot of these. So many developers, as we've learned, put so much work into the audio and the music. It's a huge part. In fact, I've heard some developers describe the audio and the music being half of the game. I myself wouldn't put it up that high, but it makes a big difference. And some of the stuff and some of the music that's going into here is awesome. All right, to round it out, and then I'll do a rundown of extra shout outs and just some commentary to after the fact. But number 10, I will talk about mostly because Chris King of Battery Staple Games caught my eye as just a person to meet and get to know. And I did. I talked to him actually multiple times throughout the event. So Chris King is the developer. He started back in 2014, I think, is when he first started developing the first game, 20XX. And 30XX came out in 2021. That's his current version of the game, and he's adding things to it with a few other people. So now he's got more people helping with the game and the studio and Battery Staple Games in general. But he started back in 20XX, with 20XX in 2014, 2015. He's got a degree from Johns Hopkins. He's got an MBA. He could have and did a little bit of work in business and industry. But back in 2014, and he tells this story as part of his background, he said, with the trajectory of where my life is probably going to end up being a grown-up, taking time to go be a game developer and make no money and, experiment with this. You don't do that when you have like a mortgage and a family and, and that kind of thing. So
some people don't.
In 2014, he felt like he was kind of getting close to the end of his timeline to be able to like
do that freewheeling thing.
Right. Roll the dice. So he did. And 20XX is a platform roguelike Mega Man style game. And it was successful. It's cool. It's stylized, but it's like that Mega Man shooter roguelike kind of, with a little bit of procedurally generated levels, and the permadeath where when you die, but in the 30XX, the procedurally generated levels stick so that you can find your way through it again and play it again and again and again until you complete the game. Kind of that's the way those kind of games work.
Right. So if a level defeats you, you can try it again.
Right. You can pick yourself up, dust yourself off, roguelike style, and go back at it again. So 20XX was successful. 30XX has been successful since 2021. Also, he had a really cool looking booth, but he was an interesting guy to talk to. So I talked to him for a while. Maybe we'll get to talk to him. I don't know if anyone got the there's multiple references here with the 20XX, 30XX. Is a reference of its own back from back in the day. And then Battery Staple Games, his game studio is a reference. It's probably even a little bit more obscure. Battery Staple comes from an XKCD comic strip frame where the creator, I forgot his name, creator of XKCD, he did one of them about the effectiveness of passwords. And this 12 character password is easy for computers to crack effectively and hard for people to remember. So it's dumb. Don't do that. Where he said, hey, why don't we just take 4 words that a human can remember, like correct horse battery staple. That was his example. And that's very difficult because it's so long. It's very difficult for a computer to crack and very easy for a human to remember. And it's funny because if you read that comic strip, you'll remember that password way after the fact. So Chris needed a company name, as in coming up with names is hard. He said Battery Staple. I don't know, sounds good enough to me. He even emailed the creator and said, hey, I want to name my game company Battery Staple. Do you care? He's like, nah, go ahead. Chris seems so on the name, but it's stuck. I like it. I think it works. Battery Staple.
I like it more now that you told me this. I liked it before because it sounds interesting. Like,
Yeah.
but I like it better now because I love that comic and I love that particular comic, and I use it all the time when I use the concept of it all the time when I'm making up passwords.
Right. Exactly. So that was another reason that Chris caught my eye, and I was able to talk to Chris both at the event and then at a side event that went on one of the nights, which I guess we can transition to now. So there's 10, many more. And in fact, we'll do some shout outs now just to sort of round it out, but many more. And forgive me if we met and we talked a bunch, and I'm going to name a bunch of names now, but I'm sure there will be others where we may even do interviews coming up, but I haven't included in this first list. This was a relatively random. I wanted to try to create a sampling and not have to go for 4 hours today. But amazing games and amazing people, and that's why I went to PAX West. So a couple shout outs on the side. The side event that I went to, I did go to a side event, which was sponsored by Indie Games Poland Foundation at a Polish cultural center in Seattle. That was fun. And there's a bunch of industry people there and a bunch of creators, and I got to catch up with people. We got to take our masks off because 100% masks in the event itself, and then it was sort of mostly unmasked at the party on the side because it was a little more open and many fewer people, obviously, not thousands of people. So it was interesting to see people without a mask on. It was a whole different. I had to recognize the people that I had talked to on the show floor from the nose up, but I was able to do it. It's amazing how you put that together. But Jakub Wojcik, or Kuba Wojcik, is one of the executives that leads the Indie Games Poland Foundation and has a studio of his own. He was the one who invited me to that event, and actually I had gotten emails for the event ahead of time as part of the lead up, but had declined because I was supposed to be gone. I extended my trip. Jakub got me in, which was great because they had a bunch of Polish food, and I grew up with Polish food. I make
That
Polish
is
food
awesome.
myself. Really good pierogies, for one. For two, the Indie Games Poland Foundation and their booth at PAX West was huge, and they had about 12 to 14 indie studios from Poland that had people there showing off their games in this whole Indie Games Poland Foundation booth. Apparently, I mentioned earlier, Played with Fire was separate. They weren't in this booth, but they were part of this whole scene as well. Apparently, CDPR, CD Projekt Red, Cyberpunk 2077, that's another side discussion. Good news on Cyberpunk 2077 from my point of view, and their most recent update and an expansion that they've got coming out. That's really fun. They're huge. They're in Poland. I think they're in Krakow. They're a big organization. They did the Witcher games. Apparently, people spin out of that studio, as happens with all big studios, and have formed a lot of, hey, I want to go off and do my own project. I want to go off and form an indie studio of my own and do some things. And there's a big indie scene as a result that is partially from that and partially just because of there's so many interesting people in the area, probably generating buzz and interest for new people coming into the industry. Huge indie scene of some really high quality, really interesting games coming out of that Poland indie scene. I expect that to continue to be big. I met Joanna Keller, who's working with Klabater, is the little studio. They've got a game out. I don't usually get pickup swag from anybody. I leave that for them to give to their fans, but she handed me this art book for their game Moonshine, which is an amazing game. I hope to talk to her more. Beautiful game.
Wow, that's a beautiful book. And yes.
Yeah, beautiful book and artwork. Sort of like a potion crafting, but you're making moonshine and building up your little business and
I
getting it out
like
there.
the sound of that.
So she was really cool. But as I said, there was like a dozen of these all around there. And I talked to a couple other ones. There was a cool developer who I talked to who's got a game where you're a giant and you're basically unleashing your wrath on the humans who have defied the ancient pact with the giants for peace. So now you're unleashing your rat, and you walk around as a giant and smash their villages and things like that. It's really cool looking. So yeah, shout out and a big thanks to Jakub for the invite there. A couple other shout outs to run down the list. I went to Finji's booth. As I mentioned, we did our interview with Jonah, who is one of the QA people working with Finji. I met Nathan, one of their executives from Finji, and we talked for a while. He's also a narrative designer for some of their games. We might get Nathan on. He had lots of things to say, some things that matched up very well with our Ashley interview, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then he seemed to have a lot of hot takes that it would be really fun for him to talk about. How like one of them, just as I was walking away, is like, ask me about Batman sometime and how he's a toxic character from a narrative perspective. I'm like, oh, and he seemed like kind of angry at Batman. So we're gonna have to talk to Nathan sometime.
Okay, that sounds awesome. Yeah,
and
definitely want to talk to him.
Finji had a relatively big booth there. That was kind of cool. They were showing off Tunic and a bunch of their other games. I met an indie developer, real small, like one of the smaller booths, Folklore Games, Mikhail Valancourt, and he has a game called Spiral. Very stylized, really interesting, sort of like a little bit of puzzle game, but it's focused on a very personal story to him around memory loss and advanced age or Alzheimer's type memory loss, which he experienced with multiple members of his family in the past 3, 4, 5 years. So he sort of built a game to sort of explore both what that's like and create some game loops and puzzles around it and explore it as a concept and use it as a mechanism for him to really sort of explore what he was thinking on the topic as well. So that's an interesting one. Little shout out there. I met Mason, who's working on Way of Rhea, an indie puzzle game. Mason seemed very interesting and will be doing some developer talks coming up at a separate developer event in Seattle. And Mason said, yeah, I'd love to talk about it. I'd love to talk to new people in the industry and developers about what it's like and how to get into it and that kind of thing. And then Way of Rhea itself seemed like a well-formed, really cool
It looks
game.
really, yeah. Way of Rhea looks really interesting.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll get to talk to Mason. Two guys I talked to from Ska Studios. They have a couple really good games from Ska Studios. James Silva and Shane Lynch. Might try to get them on. My big connection there is James worked for Microsoft for quite a while, so they're in the sort of in this them being in the Seattle area there made sense. But then they also had a Midwest connection. I think part of Shane's family lives in Naperville, which is like 20 minutes from where I live. So we were going to talk about Midwest things and spending time around the Midwest. So I connected really well with both of those guys, and their artwork and animation in their sort of side-scrolling, I think even co-op little adventure game, fighting game looked really, really cool. And their Ska Studios style just seemed cool. Another mid-sized studio, two mid-sized studios that caught my eye, and I did go there. It's a little bit more difficult to talk to any of the bigger studios when you're there, because a lot of them have just either they've hired people or people from the publisher, more like the marketing team is sort of like working the show floor. So you don't really get to talk to the creators, but I did talk to one of the PR leads from Thunderful. And Thunderful just seems like a wonderful publisher, mid-sized studio out of Sweden. They had two games, which I really, really liked. One that I imagine will be really big is called Planet of Lana. I think it's going to be released on Game Pass as soon as it comes out. So really stylistic and artistic, and will be relatively big. They had another one, and I forgot the name. I tried to look it up before this, and I'm going to have to find it again. but it's more of like a pixel art kind of style adventure. And the idea of the game, and it sort of shifts between more fully rendered 3D and pixel art. And the idea of the game is sort of tongue-in-cheek, funny idea is the resolution of the world, like resolution is being sucked out of the world. So you can imagine like our world turning into a pixel, a pixel world. And you are the champion and you need to go, solve this. But it's ironic that you're the champion because you're the lowest res being in the universe. And you're basically just a stick person made out of like 30, like each of your arms is 5 pixels in a row and your head is 5 pixels. And you carry around a little sword. It's hilarious. They have a character create screen where you can shift the sliders, like make yourself skinnier or fatter, but it does nothing because you're just 5 pixels. So your character sits on the left and you can move
that is hilarious.
the sliders wherever you want and your pixels just stay there. So clever, funny, interesting game, and that's part of Thunderful. But this, and I sometimes judge a book by its cover a little bit with some of these studios. I love seeing the behind the scenes of the studio with, if it's like happy people that seem like they're having a good time developing games, I want to meet them. So that's what makes me want to meet Thunderful. They've got some really fun pictures of them as a team there in Sweden. Second game, second studio in that category, same thing. Just seemed like a fun place, a fun studio. I wanted to meet them. Snowcastle Games out of Norway. I did get to meet Nicholas Rajan. He lives in Norway. He's Norwegian, but he grew up in the US. So he sounded like just like a Midwest bro. Just a fun guy. And I was talking to him, and I'm like, wait, so you live in Norway? He's like, yeah, I live in Norway. And he is Norwegian. He just grew up in the US. Hopefully we'll get Nick on. Iconei Island, Ikonei Island, relatively big title. They've got sort of some lore around it out of Snowcastle Games. It's a kind of a fun, more of a cozy adventure kind of style game, which is pretty cool. But I'd love to hear more about the gaming scene in Norway and Snowcastle Games and what they do. So that's a fun one. As I already said, I grabbed his card over here already. Shout out to Mike Strollart with Below the Stone. Another Apogee is the publisher, doing some cool things with some indie developers. Definitely want to talk more to Mike. It's a pixel game, so you can imagine kind of Stardew Valley, but it's all underground mining, building out your life as the little miner underground with some procedural dungeons and procedural mines that you're mining out. And although there's a way to sort of like complete the game, because it's procedurally generated, you're sort of like building your little underground empire. It sort of continues on. Very cool. Shout out to the team at Elderson Studios on their game Silentium. Silentium looks like a cool little game as well, but Elderson Studios seemed like a great group. They had 6 people in their studio. I met 5 of them because the 6th one wasn't feeling well and was back in the hotel room. So I met basically the entire studio there on the show floor of PAX West, which I just thought was really cool. I'd like to talk to them more. They seemed like a great group too. And then, then 2 others. One which gets to more of that class, which I did see a lot of, but Whitethorn Games. The Whitethorn Games is a publisher that makes a lot of those cozy adventures. Calico is one of their bigger games. Cozy, fun, interesting little games. Some of them aren't even that little, but non-combat, hardcore, no horror, no shooting, that kind of class of games where you can go on adventures, you can have fun, you can explore. The thing that strikes me, especially when I saw these booths and I'm going through them, is it was a great place if you just stood back and you watched. You would see like kids and and families would sit down and just really get into this stuff. And if you're pulling more people into gaming that way, that's really good in my mind. This was a place where I'd also see a lot of like young girls would just like be down and, deep into the games and like stuck to the screen for a long time in a couple of these booths in this way. 50% of gamers in the marketplace today across all gaming genres, even in PC games, 50% of gamers are women, or girls and women. And it's hard to find them sometimes. You go to some place like PAX West and PAX East, and it seems like a lot of guys. It seems like a lot of guys making the games, and it seems like a lot of guys playing the games, where 50, and in some places even more than 50% of the market is women and girls. Where are they? This is a place where they would potentially be, although they're playing all of the games. So I think getting, reaching out and making cool places for them to both explore, games for more women to make, which are all of these kinds of games as well. But I don't know where they're hanging out on it, because not there were. I would say it was about 30% women across PAX West, but not 50%. So
yeah, I hear you.
And then the last one, which I'll just give a shout out to because they're a really cool organization in general, is Schell Games, SCHELL. I only talked to them for a little bit. They were kind of a big deal because they're currently a studio which is making the VR version of Among Us. They do a whole bunch of other kinds of things on the side as a tech and studio. That's I think even a bunch of things that are non-games. But they're doing the VR version of Among Us. They had a bunch of people lining up at their booth, and VR and Among Us, that seems like that potentially be a hit. So congratulations to them. All right. As I said, I've got these stacks of cards. So I'm sure, there's more people that we'll talk to and hopefully that we'll interview, more people that I didn't mention here. So as I said, I apologize for that, but amazing event. Great people, really fun to talk to all of the people that I talked to, and tons of fun games coming out for all of us, which is good for us.
All the games.
Play all the games and all the kinds of games and meet all of the creators. That's what we want to do. So there you go, Sema. I know I was talking at you for most of that, but I wanted to get through this stuff. So what do you think? PAX West seemed pretty successful to you?
In a number of ways. I really liked the theme that's come up a few times of embracing more people into the world of games. I liked that it was so vibrant and so well attended and so many vendors were there. And I liked that you got to go.
And I had a good time. As I said, extended my visit. Was there an extra day. That was crazy.
There's a recurring theme there too, right? Because like PAX East was a last minute decision because you weren't going to go, and then you decided at the last minute to go, and it turned out to be great. And PAX West, you were going to go, but you were going to come home early, and you extended your stay. So both of them have turned out to be better than anticipated.
Exactly. Exceeded my expectations. And as far as I can tell, just to sort of sum it up and answer that question that people seem to ask, it seems back. Games seem back. The meetups, the events, and PAX West as an event certainly seems back to me. I think we're finally coming back as far as that goes, and hope to see more in the future. I don't know what's next, Sema. I think GDC in the spring might be the next big one out there on the horizon. What if we have a presence, a new overlords behind the games presence at GDC? I think
I like that idea. I'm willing to send you anywhere. I think you should go to Tokyo.
That's a sacrifice you're willing to make?
Right.
All right. I think with that, we can wrap this up. This, as I said, was pretty amazing. Feel free to send me or Sema any questions, follow up, and I really do hope that we'll get to both interview lots of these people and maybe do some side features on some of these games where we show it off in a much smaller video format. We'll see how that goes. If there are any more that in particular you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on or more of Sema's thoughts on as we sum these up, put it down in the comments or jump in our Discord and ask us, because I think that would be really fun to get a little bit of feedback as far as that goes as well. All right, that's it for now.
All right.
I will talk to you later, Sema.
Later, everyone.
This has been a New Overlords production. For more, please visit newoverlords.com for video, subscribe and feed links, and other ways to help the show.